The business class cabin is a tomb of silence, soft ambient lighting glowing against polished wood. Madeline Frost, a global tech CEO, sits in seat 2A, her eyes cold and sharp. Next to her, a single dad in a worn canvas jacket, cradling a small boy. Madeline scoffs, pressing the call button. She whispers to the flight attendant, her voice dripping with irritation. "I'm not used to sitting next to people like this. Please move them." Suddenly, a violent shudder rocks the frame. The seatbelt signs flash red. Then, the captain's voice breaks over the intercom, breathless and desperate. "Attention passengers. Is there a fighter pilot on board?" His name is Ryan Cole, 44 years old. A man whose face is a map of hard miles, high-altitude G-forces, and heavy unspoken stories. In his arms, 6-year-old Leo is curled into a tiny ball of fear, clutching a frayed teddy bear with one eye missing. Ryan doesn't look like he belongs in business class. He is wearing an old, faded military-style jacket with the patches ripped off, scuffed work boots that have seen too much grease, and jeans that have been patched at the knees. He was supposed to be in seat 44E, squeezed into the back of the plane, but a last-minute technical upgrade at the gate had thrust him into the world of the 1%. To the wealthy executives surrounding him, he is a ghost, a glitch in the luxury matrix, a nobody who somehow slipped past the velvet rope. Inside Ryan's mind, he is far away from the champagne and the leather seats. He is still flying. Even after 5 years on the ground, his brain still processes the world in vectors and airspeeds. He can feel the slight lag in the left turbine. He can hear the subtle pitch change in the hydraulic pumps. Ryan was once a ghost himself, a Top Gun commander who led F-22 Raptor missions over territories that don't appear on civilian maps. He was the man the Pentagon called when impossible was the only option. He left the cockpit after a classified mission over the desert went sideways. A mission where he saved his entire squadron through a suicidal maneuver, but lost his best friend, his wingman Sledge, and a piece of his own heart. He chose to raise Leo alone in a quiet coastal town, working as a mechanic, trading the adrenaline of the sky for the peace of a school run. In his jacket pocket, Ryan carries a heavy silver coin, the squadron challenge coin Sledge had given him the night before that final mission. Every time the plane bumps, Ryan's fingers brush against it, a silent anchor to a past he tried to bury. He remembers the way the desert sun looked through the canopy, a blinding gold that felt like home. Now the gold he sees is the expensive jewelry on the woman next to him, but it lacks the warmth of the sun at 30,000 feet. Madeline Frost is the absolute opposite of a ghost. At 40, she is the reigning queen of Frost Global Tech. She is brilliant, ruthless, and accustomed to a world where everything and everyone has its proper, hierarchy-defined place. And in her world, people like Ryan belong in the service entrance, or perhaps fixing her limousine, certainly not in the seat next to her. She avoids his gaze with a practiced effort, her nose slightly wrinkled as if the very scent of his humble life is an affront to her $300 an ounce perfume. She spends the first hour of the flight tapping away at a customized titanium laptop, moving billions of dollars across continents with a single click, completely unaware that the man she is trying to ignore has moved mountains with much less. Inside Ryan's chest, a different kind of clock is ticking. Every time Leo whimpers in his sleep, Ryan feels the ghost of Sledge's voice over the comms during that final descent. He hasn't told Leo the truth about the metals hidden in a shoebox under the bed. He wants Leo to grow up knowing a father who builds things with his hands, not a man who destroyed them from the sky. He looks at his own hands, the grease stained into the cracks of his knuckles, and then looks at Madeline's pristine, diamond-encrusted fingers. The contrast is more than just wealth. It's a chasm of reality. Madeline lives in a world of abstractions and high-speed fiber optics, while Ryan lives in a world of raw physics, heavy metal, and gravity. He feels the aircraft shiver, a vibration so subtle no passenger would notice. He knows the stabilizer is fighting a phantom crosswind that doesn't exist. Today, Ryan is traveling to a veterans memorial service, a quiet, somber trip to honor Sledge. Leo is terrified of heights, a fear that has gripped him since he was old enough to understand that his father used to live in the clouds. Ryan spends the flight whispering into his son's ear, "Look at me. Just look at me, buddy. I've got you. The sky isn't the enemy. It's just another road we're traveling on." Madeline Frost hears his soft, rhythmic whispers and rolls her eyes in the dark, clicking her tongue in a show of elite disapproval. She sees a weak man, a man of no consequence who can't even keep his child quiet. She has no idea that the grease monkey next to her has looked death in the eye at Mach 2.5 and never even blinked. The flight is 3 hours in when the social tension reaches a boiling point. A flight attendant arrives with a tray of crystal glasses and vintage wine. Madeline takes her glass without a word or a "thank you," her cold blue eyes fixed on the man she wants erased from her field of vision. She leans over, her voice clinical and sharp as a scalpel. "Tell me, Mr. Cole, what exactly is it that you do? I'm trying to understand the algorithm that placed someone of your background in a cabin meant for those who drive the global economy." Ryan doesn't look up from Leo, who is finally drifting into a restless sleep. "I'm a mechanic," he says simply, his voice low and steady. "I fix things that people break." Madeline lets out a short, dry laugh that sounds like breaking glass. "A mechanic, of course. I don't think the seat was designed for someone who fixes things. This cabin is a sanctuary for people who build the future, who lead thousands. You are taking up oxygen and space that belongs to someone of actual value. It's about efficiency, Mr. Cole, and you are inefficient." Ryan remains silent. He has nothing to prove to a woman who measures human worth by a quarterly earnings report. But his ears are tracking the song of the aircraft. He hears the high-pressure fuel pump beginning to whine, a frequency that's 2 octaves too high. He feels the floorboards hum against his boots. The machine is telling him a story, and the ending is going to be violent. But then, a small accident happens. Leo, startled by a sharp bump of turbulence, accidentally knocks over a glass of water on the shared armrest. A few drops splash onto Madeline's $5,000 designer silk suit. She snaps like a dry twig. Madeline stands up, her face flushed with a terrifying corporate rage. She calls the lead attendant over, her voice echoing through the quiet, prestigious cabin. "I've had enough of this charity. Look at this. This man and his disruptive child are a nuisance. I paid for exclusivity, and instead I am being subjected to incompetence and filth. Move them to the back of the plane immediately, or I will personally ensure your airline loses our corporate account by tomorrow morning. This is unacceptable." The attendant is flustered, stuttering a series of apologies. Ryan quietly wipes the water from the floor with a handful of napkins, his face a mask of absolute calm. He doesn't look at Madeline. He just places his body between her rage and his son. He knows that in her world, he is a cockroach, but he also knows that cockroaches are the only things that survive a nuclear blast. He feels the engines change pitch again, a low-frequency hum that vibrates in his molars. He knows the fuel pump on engine 2 just cavitated. The air in the cabin begins to thin, smelling faintly of electrical ozone, a precursor to disaster. But before Madeline can finish her tirade, the cabin floor suddenly drops. It isn't a bump. It's a terrifying, weightless plunge. The cabin lights flicker, turning a haunting, emergency amber. A siren begins to wail from the front of the plane, a dual-tone scream that signals a total system failure. Madeline is thrown back into her seat with a force that knocks the wind out of her, her champagne glass shattering against the walnut tray. Then, the voice comes over the speakers. It isn't the calm, reassuring voice of the captain. It is high, strained, and filled with a raw, primal terror. "This is the co-pilot. We have a dual-engine flame out at 38,000 feet. The captain has suffered a massive stroke. He is incapacitated. We are losing cabin pressure, and the flight computer is non-responsive. If there is anyone with military flight experience, specifically a fighter pilot who understands manual override systems, please, for the love of God, press your call button now. The cabin falls into a deathly, paralyzing silence. The tech titans, the billionaire investors, the people of value, they all freeze. Their power, their money, their titles. All of it is useless against the physics of 30 tons of metal falling through a vacuum. Madeline Frost is clutching her armrest so hard her knuckles are white, her eyes wide with the sudden, icy realization that all her billions cannot hold this plane in the sky. She looks around the cabin, waiting for one of the leaders to rise. No one moves. No one speaks. The plane begins to tilt, the nose dipping toward the dark, hungry Atlantic Ocean below. Ryan Cole closes his eyes for a split second. He can feel the familiar weight of the airframe in the seat of his pants. He knows exactly what happened. The engines didn't just fail, they choked on a sudden temperature inversion. He looks at Leo, who is crying silently, the yellow oxygen mask hovering in front of his face. Ryan reaches out and kisses his forehead. "Stay here, Leo. Keep your mask on. Daddy has to go fix the big bird for a minute." Madeline Frost looks at him, her mouth hanging open in a silent gasp. "What are you doing?" she whispers, her voice trembling. "Sit down. You're just a mechanic. You'll kill us all." Ryan stands up, his posture changing. The slouch is gone. The nobody is gone. He looks like a man forged in a furnace. "Sometimes," Ryan says, looking her dead in the eye with a gaze that makes her feel like an insect, "the future needs to be fixed by hand." The walk to the cockpit feels like a journey through a nightmare. The cabin is a scene of pure, unadulterated chaos. People are praying, some are screaming into their phones, but Ryan moves through it with the steady, rhythmic gait of a man walking into a familiar office. He reaches the reinforced cockpit door and taps the emergency bypass code. A terrified flight attendant, her face streaked with tears, blocks his way. "Sir, you need to go back. This is for authorized personnel only. We are in a crash sequence." Ryan doesn't argue. He pulls a small, weathered leather wallet from his inner pocket. Inside is an old, silver-bordered military ID card. It has no name, only a rank, a security clearance level that would make a senator nervous, and a call sign, Commander Ryan Viper. Cole, Elite Combat Wing. The attendant's eyes go wide as she recognizes the seal. She steps aside immediately, her hand trembling as she opens the door. Ryan enters the cockpit. It's a storm of flashing lights and warning bells. The co-pilot, a young man named Miller, is hyperventilating, his hands shaking so violently they are rattling the controls. The captain is slumped in his seat, his face a gray mask of unconsciousness. The plane is screaming at them in a mechanical female voice. "Terrain, terrain. Pull up, pull up." "Step aside, Miller," Ryan says. His voice isn't loud, but it carries a weight of command that cuts through the alarms like a hot knife through butter. Miller looks up, tears streaming down his face. "Who are you? The computer says we're dead. We're in a deep stall. We have no thrust." "The computers are lying to you, son," Ryan says. He drops into the pilot's seat, his hands instantly finding the familiar rhythm of the controls. He doesn't look at the manual. He knows this flight deck. He knows the soul of this machine because he helped write the flight laws for this specific avionics suite. The computers are trying to fly a commercial route in a crisis. We need to fly a combat recovery route. We're going to trade altitude for airspeed. We're going to dive into the thick air. Dive? Are you insane? We'll disintegrate. Miller gasps as the ocean rushes up to meet them. Ryan doesn't answer. He pushes the nose down. Hard. The plane groans, the wings vibrating with a terrifying strain. In the cabin, Madeline Frost screams at the top of her lungs as she feels the floor fall away. She thinks they are dying. She thinks the mechanic is committing mass murder. Ryan is ignoring the screaming sensors. He's counting the seconds in his head, timing the compression in the combustion chambers. He can feel the air getting thicker, more bitey on the flaps. He needs that density to kickstart the cold titanium blades. This isn't a 747 to him. It's a giant dart, and he is the one throwing it. He pulls a manual lever, the ram air turbine, and the cockpit lights surge with a flickering life. The G-force pins him to the seat, a familiar, brutal embrace. He grinds his teeth, fighting the tunnel vision. This is the Viper dive, a maneuver that separates the pilots from the legends. The ocean is coming up at 400 knots, a blue wall of glass. On my mark, we prime the left engine fuel bus, Ryan commands, his eyes scanning the horizon like a hawk. 3, 2, 1. Now! Miller hits the switch. A low, guttural rumble vibrates through the floor. The left turbine coughs, a plume of dark smoke trailing behind the wing. Then, with a sound like a literal thunderclap, it roars to life. Left engine stable at 60% N1, Miller cries, his voice filled with a shock that borders on religious. 1 is enough to fly, Ryan says, his sweat dripping onto the control yoke. But we need 2 to land this heavy beast. We're too heavy for a single-engine approach in this weather. He levels the plane out at barely 5,000 feet. The Atlantic is visible, dark, churning, and hungry, the white caps of the waves looking like teeth. Ryan closes his eyes, visualizing the airflow. He adjusts the trim, performing a delicate, high-precision roll to clear the air intake of the right engine. It's a maneuver that shouldn't be physically possible for a plane of this size. But Ryan isn't flying a commercial jet anymore. He is flying an F-22 with 300 souls on board. The right engine sparks, sputters, and then, whoosh, a perfect, steady blue flame. Both engines green, Miller whispers, staring at Ryan as if he were a god. We're flying. We're actually flying. Ryan lets out a long, shaky breath, the first one he've taken in 10 minutes. He grabs the radio. Gander Tower, this is Flight 442. We have dual engine recovery. We have an incapacitated captain requesting emergency priority landing at the nearest military strip. Clear the runway. We're coming in hot and heavy. Call sign, Viper 1. Authenticate. The radio crackles. A shocked voice comes back. Viper 1? Commander Cole? We thought you were retired. Copy that, Commander. The runway is yours. Welcome back to the sky. The descent into the military base is tense, but the violent shaking that threatened to tear the plane apart has finally stopped. Ryan continues to guide the massive jet from the cockpit, his eyes fixed on the landing lights in the distance. He doesn't leave his seat. He doesn't go back to the cabin to claim his glory. He stays at the post, his hands steady on the yoke until the wheels touch the tarmac with a perfect, feather-light kiss. Back in the cabin, the absolute silence of terror has been replaced by a different kind of sound. It is the sound of 200 people exhaling at once, a collective sob of relief. The flight attendant who had seen Ryan's ID walks through the aisle, her face pale but her eyes shining with a strange reverence. She stops next to Madeline Frost. Madeline is trembling, her expensive silk suit ruined by spilled champagne, her hair a chaotic mess. She looks at the empty seat next to her, the seat where the mechanic had been sitting. Is he the one? Did he do it? She asks, her voice barely a whisper. The attendant nods slowly. That man is Commander Ryan Cole. He's a former F-22 Top Gun pilot, one of the highest decorated officers in the history of the Air Force. The co-pilot said, he performed a maneuver that isn't even in the civilian flight books. He saved us, Miss Frost. No commercial pilot on Earth could have done what he just did. And to think, you wanted him in the back. Madeline feels a cold, sharp stone drop into the pit of her stomach. She remembers her words. A man of no value, taking up space, an insult to my fare. She remembers the way she looked at his old jacket with disgust. She remembers how she tried to have him removed because he wasn't elite enough to sit in her presence. She realizes that the man she treated like trash was the only reason she was still breathing. She realizes that her exclusivity almost cost her life. She looks at the small boy, Leo, who is still clutching his teddy bear. She feels a wave of shame so intense it physically burns. She thinks of all the meetings she's led, all the people she's fired for being inefficient. She realized that in a world stripped of titles and bank accounts, she was the one who was inefficient. She was the one who had nothing to offer the sky. The plane comes to a final stop on the military apron. The emergency crews swarm the runway, their sirens lighting up the night. Ryan walks out of the cockpit, his face calm, his hands deep in his pockets. He looks exhausted, his back damp with sweat. He walks straight to his seat in business class. Leo is waiting, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and wonder. The little boy unbuckles his seatbelt and throws his arms around Ryan's neck, nearly knocking him over. "You fixed the big bird, Daddy! I heard the thunder! You made it stop shaking!" "Yeah, buddy," Ryan whispers, holding him so tight his knuckles turn white. "I fixed the bird. We're safe now, I promise." Madeline Frost stands up. She wants to speak. She wants to apologize. She wants to offer him money, a job, $1 million, anything. But as she looks at Ryan, she realizes that she is the one who is small. She is the one of no consequence. Ryan doesn't even look at her. He doesn't need her apology. He doesn't need her recognition. He is already walking toward the exit, his son on his shoulder, his mission complete. The other passengers begin to clap, a slow, rhythmic applause that builds into a roar that fills the entire aircraft. The tech titans, the investors, the celebrities, they are all standing for the man in the worn canvas jacket. Madeline stands among them, but for the first time in her life, she feels completely and utterly invisible. She has billions, but she has no value in the presence of a king. The military terminal is a swarm of cameras, reporters, and Air Force officials, but Ryan Cole is nowhere to be found. He slipped out through a side hangar with the help of the base commander, an old friend who saluted him with a tear in his eye. He didn't want a parade. He didn't want a Hero of the Year award. He just wanted to take Leo to get a burger and find a quiet hotel room where they could sleep without the sound of alarms. Madeline Frost stands in the private VIP lounge of the base, watching the breaking news coverage on a massive screen. The headline reads, "Ghost pilot saves 300 souls." The reporters are desperate to find the mechanic in seat 2B, but the Air Force has already stepped in, sealing his records with a level 5 encryption. They know who Ryan Cole is, and they know he doesn't want to be a hero. He just wants to be a father. Madeline looks at her phone. She has 12 missed calls from her board of directors, 34 emails about the multi-billion-dollar merger she was supposed to sign. But for the first time in 20 years, she doesn't care about the numbers. She keeps thinking about Ryan's eyes. They weren't the eyes of a man seeking power or wealth. They were the eyes of a man who knew exactly who he was, even when the world told him he was nothing. She walks over to the window, looking out at the massive silhouette of the plane sitting on the runway. She realizes that she had spent her whole life building a castle made of glass, thinking she was safe because she was high above everyone else. But when the glass shattered, it wasn't her board of directors who saved her. It was the man on the ground who reached up and caught the falling world. She sees her reflection in the terminal glass. The expensive suit is torn, the diamonds look cold and lifeless. She doesn't recognize the woman staring back at her. She looks at her phone again and deletes the merger agreement. Some things are more important than expansion. She sees a man in the distance, walking across the dark parking lot with a small child on his back. It might be him. It might not. She takes a deep breath, her pride finally crumbling into ash. She picks up her phone and sends a message to her entire company, from the janitors to the VPs. Subject, a new standard of human value. Message, from today on, we stop looking at titles. We stop looking at the price of the suit. We look at the hands that do the work and the hearts that don't blink in the storm. I was taught a lesson today by a man who fixes things. It's time we all learned how to listen to the silence. Ryan Cole sits in a quiet, 24-hour diner 5 miles away. He watches Leo eat his fries with a sleepy smile, the silver military ID tucked back into his weathered wallet. He feels the old, familiar peace returning to his chest. He doesn't care that the world is looking for a hero. He has his son. He has the ground under his feet, and he has the sky in his heart. As he prepares to pay the bill, the base commander walks in, offering him a secret envelope. "You could have your wings back tomorrow, Commander. The Chief of Staff wants you in D.C." Ryan looks at his son, then at the mechanic's grease under his nails. He shakes his head. "I've done enough flying for 3 lifetimes, General. I'm exactly where I need to be." The sky didn't care about Madeline's billions. The wind didn't care about Ryan's old jacket. At 38,000 feet, there is no CEO and there is no mechanic. There is only the truth. And the truth is, you never know who is sitting next to you until the engines go silent. If you believe that real value speaks louder than any title, subscribe for more stories that reveal the truth hidden in the shadows. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been judged unfairly, only to prove everyone wrong when it mattered most? Let's talk about it below.